We mention fishing in the wind all the time, but we don't really go into depth on how to specifically attack windy situations. Well, that's what we're going to discuss today. One of our viewers specifically requested this video. He said, "Hey Steve, I've gone through all your videos and I don't see one that is specific to fishing in very windy conditions or how to approach it." And I thought, you know what, that is a great idea. We talk about the wind all the time in various videos, but I've not had one that is solely dedicated to windy conditions. Now, I know that the wind can be very frustrating. I've had days where it drives me crazy. But on the flip side of that, when I think back to all my best days I have ever had on lakes, reservoirs, or rivers, they've all been when the wind is very strong. As a matter of fact, those times when the people in the boat, when we're getting doubles and triples all hooked up at the same time, they've all been on horribly windy days. So that's why I think it's real important that we discuss it and break it down, and just know that for each one of us, that level of frustration is different. So maybe some of us at 10 miles per hour, like, you know what, that's just too much. And maybe some of us that's 20 miles per hour. So depending on whether or not you're fishing from the shore or the size of your boat, that level of when you try to escape some of the wind is going to be different. But let's jump right into what I would consider a mild day, or in other words, where the wind is mild and there's just a slight chop on the water. So the wind is present, but it is not overwhelming. One of the most common mistakes that I see anglers do, and I have fallen victim to this myself on many occasions, is that oftentimes we go down the shoreline and let the wind push the boat. When the wind is pushing the boat along, our boat control and casting accuracy are both severely compromised. So when you have a mild chop on the water, put the bow of the boat into the wind, and it's going to improve your boat control. You're going to be able to hold exactly where you want to hold much easier, and your casting accuracy is going to go way up. When you have a slight chop on the water, that doesn't necessarily mean that the food chain is going to be going crazy. Those bass could still be relating to thick cover, hanging out in the shade, you know, orienting themselves on some sort of piece of structure. Now, as far as lures that I'm going to use when there's a slight chop on the water, I'm still going to primarily focus on a horizontal presentation, because hopefully the bass have enlarged their strike zone just a little bit. So I'm going to be fishing things like your swim jigs, your swim baits, your paddle tail soft jerk baits. And then as far as like your jigs, flipping and pitching lures, you know, if I want to drop them down vertically, I am going to make sure that they have some sort of trailer on them, soft plastic trailer, that allows me to have a swimming action as well, whether that's a big craw on the back or a twin tail grub, something like that. So when my presentation vertically is done, I can swim it back all the way to the boat and check a horizontal presentation as well. We just had a video on tube jigs in the fall specifically, and they offer a great opportunity to fish both horizontally and vertically. The other thing to keep in mind when you have a slight chop on the water, especially if you're used to fishing very clear lakes and rivers, is that chop is going to hide you just a little bit more. So if you're fishing from the shore, this is great news. You're going to be able to sneak up to that brush pile, sneak up to that weed bed a little bit easier. If you're in a boat, it's okay then to get just a little bit closer to your targets, so that the chop on the water breaks up the vision from the fish from underneath up above just a little bit. Obviously they can still see somewhat through the surface of that water, but you're going to be hidden as an angler a little bit more, which means we can get slightly closer, which directly correlates into casting accuracy, which is always a good thing. All right, now what about if that wind is just ripping? You have, you know, maybe some white caps coming, you've just got it really pounding when you put that boat in the water. It is windy. Well, the first thing that I do is figure out what shorelines, what banks are getting pounded by the wind the most, and that is where I want to start. When the wind is really hitting the shoreline, it creates this constant disturbance, this turmoil under the water. And what that does, it gets the microorganisms, the zooplankton, kicks them out of the rocks and the weeds and, you know, more suspended in the water column. This gets the bait fish and the small minnows and the sunfish all going, and when all of that life is activated, that means the predators are going to be coming in to investigate as well. That's why wind, strong wind, is such a good thing for the food chain. Now, when the wind is really, really ripping and you're fishing a specific stretch of shoreline, most likely that wind is going to be to your back or hitting you from the side a little bit. So it's a little different from when you've got a slight wind and you're putting that bow of the boat into the wind. When you're targeting an entire wind-blown shoreline, the wind is going to be behind you, or like I said, more off to the side. So boat positioning obviously is going to be a little more problematic, but that's okay, because when the wind is ripping, that food chain is most likely been activated. I'm not as concerned with super accurate casts. I want to cover some water, cover a stretch of shoreline, and see where those fish are actively feeding. The strike zones are going to be bigger, the strikes are going to be stronger, and now I'm going to put on some lures that definitely cover more water. This is where I'm picking up my spinner baits. Man, that is a great windy day lure. If I've got some rock that I'm working, my number one choice is going to be a square bill crankbait. I also like to try and throw suspending hard jerk baits when there's a lot of wind out there. These are the types of days that you can put that jerk bait out there and rip, and then boom, you just get hit constantly. Now remember, like I said in the beginning, my days on the water where everybody in the boat is catching fish have almost 100% exclusively been on the windiest days that I have fished. Now, if I find a good stretch of shoreline, I'm just going to try to parallel that shoreline as long as I can. Obviously try to control the boat in the wind the best that I can, but I'm doing just a lot of fan casting out there. I'm looking for those active fish. When I've got those types of situations where I know the food chain should be just really going, I'm not concerned about getting that bass that's in a neutral mood and sulking down underneath the dock. I am specifically searching for the fish that are aggressively feeding. The other nice thing about fishing the roaring wind is odds are you're going to be the only boat out there. And that's always great news when you can get to a portion of the lake or river and there's no one else there. Your odds of catching go way, way up. So remember, super windy days, it's more about covering water, finding aggressive fish on a really wind-blown bank. And when the wind is kind of mild, there's just a slight chop on the water, it's more about control. Boat control going into the wind and casting accuracy, because the fish aren't quite going to be as active as when that wind is really, really pounding away. Now, if it is just too windy for whatever your level of tolerance is of the wind, if it's just too crazy out there and you have to find a little bit of shelter, the key is a little bit. You don't want to go into an area that's completely protected and it's slick, calm. Try to find a happy medium. Try to find a place where the wind is still hitting a shoreline, but maybe it's not quite as intense. There have been many days where I can get on the leeward side of a point and throw out across that point to where the wind is just really smacking it, but I'm more a little bit out of the way. So really take a look at your Google Maps, your topographic map on your electronics, whatever you might have, and see if you need to find a little less wind. Still locate an area where the wind is going to get things activated if you can. Hey, when we're talking about the fall, the weather changes constantly, right? Which means we have windy days and we have days where it's absolutely calm. And also it's this time of year when the grass beds disappear. If you would like to watch a video that talks about what to do when the grass is gone, go ahead and click on this one right here. And hey, don't forget to go out and encourage someone today. You never know how you might just change their life. For For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.